Welcome along to Conversations yet again, and once again we have Sharon here, and this time we have Mary as well. Now, Jono isn't here with us today. Unfortunately, he's been forced into isolation for a period of time. So, Mary, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me, first of all. My name's Mary. I work in the disability sector. I run teams who provide programs for people with special needs. I'm married to a big spunk called Richard, and I have a cat.
And she's one of my best friends.
Yes, I've been...
Well, that's the trifecta, isn't it? That's really the trifecta.
Since I was about 19, so it's been like...
It's been a long time.
Like 5 or 6 years, Jokes. About 20 years, yeah.
Well, today we're here to talk about the fact that people were made for connection, made for connecting with each other, I guess, emotionally, but also made for physical connection. And again, in this time of isolation, with many people not being able to have the kind of connection that they want, it manifests in all kinds of ways: irritability, anxiety, energy levels, a whole range of areas. So, Sharon, what have you noticed about how people are coping at the moment?
So I suppose the last week, as I've rung different people, I've just sort of noticed that people's energy levels are decreasing and they seem to be quite flat. I don't know, have you found that with people the last little while? You know, at first it was a bit of a novelty, wasn't it, going into isolation, but I don't know what you've noticed, but that's certainly what I've noticed.
And Mary, you work with vulnerable people. How do you think people in the vulnerable community, vulnerable people, are coping with isolation?
I think that it probably affects people who are vulnerable more than your everyday regular Joe, because it's easy for me to just jump on and do a Zoom call, and those resources are flawed in their own way, but at least they're accessible to me. To somebody who needs support to do that sort of stuff, it's a lot less accessible. But also there's this sense of routine. Most people with special needs have a very steady routine, and the people that they see, you know, even who they see on what day is very big.
It's scheduled.
Yeah. And so all of that's been just thrown out with no warning and no preparation.
So you also lead a team of people who connect with the vulnerable people. So with these connectors, obviously they must generally be people. How are they coping at the moment?
Yeah, I think the big challenge has been that we do a lot of group work together, and a lot of it, there's a lot of banter and a lot of fun and creativity and colour that's part of that. And now suddenly people are only able to support one-on-one, so they've got to not only rearrange everything and how they do it, but also without any support and without any sort of, I guess, staff support even in the moment. So, it's very different, and it's a lonely time, I think, for a lot of people. There's a bit of a sense of abandonment and sadness around it, even though everyone's doing the best they can.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend during the week, and she was saying that her great connectors, they're starting to get headaches and tummy aches, and they're very good people. And then with some of the vulnerable, I've watched them just walk around Tail Race Park just on their own, and it's quite a regular thing, and my heart just goes out to them, because so many of them are living alone, and they don't know what to do, and they don't understand everything that's happening.
Now, both of you ladies are extroverts. Sharon, I think your extroversion is about here, and yours is probably about here somewhere.
I can't help it if I'm popular.
You can't help it if you're popular. So true, Mary. Thank you. I'll take a note of it.
Don't hate me because you ain't me.
I'll try not to, I promise. So we'll start with you, Sharon, because Mary's so popular. But how are you coping as an extrovert, not having the level of people connection that you normally would like?
My energy, there's a part of my energy level that's low. So like if I do a Zoom meeting, even though you're connecting, it's a pseudo connection. And so I find when I get off the Zoom meetings, I'm quite drained from them. Whereas I don't get that. So if I'm meeting face to face with somebody, say around the table, I don't get drained from that. I actually find my energy levels go up as a result of that. And so every day it's kind of like this thing where you're aware that your energy levels are dropping, and that you need to have a conversation, a real conversation somewhere along the line for that energy level to go back up again.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Mary is an extrovert. How are you coping?
I think that the first couple of weeks, because I'd been so busy at work, I almost felt guilty about how much fun I was having just being at home with Richard and chilling out. But as the time has gone on, I've started to get these little waves of longing to be around a bunch of close friends and to just, I love cooking for people, and I just want to have, I just want to take food over and sit down and do the real interactions and just, it's really weird because most of the time I'm just cruising along thinking I'm fine, and then I just get this wave of emotion where I keep thinking, I might go, and then I just remember that we can't do this, we can't do that. It's weird. It's a weird feeling.
I think it's too if you are in a good connection, like if you have good connections, you are going to miss those people, and I think it's a real testimony to what you've built and to how you're doing life when you're really missing a group of people or a certain type of people, because they feed you, they fuel you, they inspire you. So their energy actually makes you a better person as a result. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. But it also means that in a season like this, you miss it.
Yeah, for me, as an introvert, I probably don't have the same need for connection as an extrovert has. But probably the important lesson for myself as an introvert is to make sure that I am having regular connections, because I'll undoubtedly be affected by it if I'm not having regular connections. But I probably don't have that same internal motivation driving me to have those connections. So I have to be even more purposeful about it.
You're also very task-oriented. So a lot of your connections are still around tasks.
That's correct.
So because you are a driven person, and, one of the things we're wired for is achievement. And in this season, for a lot of people, they can't achieve, so they've got to just have the break. But for yourself, and probably for other leader types, you're a high achiever, and in this season you're still achieving, and you're being helped in that achievement by the task conversations that you're having with the task people in your world. And so in that sense, you're still being fueled because you've got both task achievement, plus you've got those high caliber people who you normally would relate to. You're still Zooming with them, so they're still fueling you. So you're probably still being fueled.
Yeah, and interestingly, I don't feel drained after a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
And that's quite potentially because for me, the Zoom meetings are often about task and about what we're working on. And that's probably the kind of thing that actually energises me. Now, I've heard one comment that's been made has been that people who went into isolation early are probably experiencing perhaps greater effects than others. Does anyone have any comments?
Well, it's just an anecdotal thing that I'm just observing it with the phone calls that we're making. And I suppose we've made a fair few hundred phone calls by now across our whole demographic. And what I just find is that those that went into isolation early and probably were very strict around that and protective around that, I would say are probably still more fearful and anxious and in some ways more worried than other people who maybe aren't in this type of isolation they're in, or who have gone into it slower. So their energy levels seem a bit higher. The way in which they perceive what's happening is different. Their interaction with the whole corona thing is it's just different.
So this whole issue about our energy levels, that's another important conversation, isn't it? Why is it important that we actually have understanding about our energy levels and how they're being affected by this time?
Well, I just think energy, we all need energy, don't we?
Yeah.
And if we get those energy drains, then I think we become unwell, either in emotional health or mental health, spiritual health, physical health. And whether it's coronavirus season or whether it's post-coronavirus or pre-coronavirus, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation in our community about energy for a long time, hasn't there? About
Yeah.
stress levels, what drains you, are we being too busy, you know, do we need to slow down? You hear people all the time saying they're tired, they're weary. I don't know what other comments you would have in your workplace, but it's been a conversation our community's been having for a long time. And it's ongoing in this season. It's just a different phase. It just looks different, that's all.
Yeah, so this is an issue really that's been increasing for some period of time. That, if you like, the rhythm between isolation and connection, and we haven't as a society been generally good at that, have we?
At the balance between
Yeah.
the two? No, I don't think we have. I mean, we've got one group of people who I suppose would struggle with isolation. I don't know whether solitude's probably a better word.
Yeah,
You know,
solitude,
they've
yeah.
struggled with solitude and wanting to go into solitude. So one group of people just stay busy and hurried and keep task, or, you know, busy. And so being alone and in that quiet space, that reflective space, isn't something they're familiar with. So this is a big shock
Yeah.
this season for them. But then you've got another group of people who, with their connection, I suppose as a society we weren't connecting really well either. We were doing a lot of pseudo connections and a lot of connection on this, and now we're on it even more. But, you know, we were having a conversation as a community about whether the connections were healthy anyway.
Yeah, no, that's good. So it's really important to try and get healthy rhythms in our lives. And in a moment, I'm just going to read out a story out of the Bible, out of Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 45. And this was a story where it actually demonstrates the fact that Jesus actually had healthy rhythms where he went from connection to solitude, and back again. And that was a continual pattern through his life. Now, the scene for this story I'm about to read out is that Jesus had just had some pretty bad news, some horrific news, and he would have been grieving because he just found out that his cousin, John the Baptist, had just been killed, just been beheaded.
Which is quite traumatic.
Oh, incredibly traumatic. And we see in a moment that he drew away to a quiet place where obviously he would have had to have grieved. But at the same time, his A-team, his disciples, came back to him. They'd just been out on a high-risk venture, pioneering new ground, doing new things, and they'd achieved success, and they were excited about it. And so as Jesus went away to take some time out, he actually took his team with him. He didn't go by himself. He took his team to actually go and unpack with them and debrief with them. Let me read what happened.
I think also, just before you go on, I think he also knew that they needed time out, which is something contrary to what our culture does. You know, when we get a success in a business or success in an organisation, we come back and the CEO says, okay, well, what's the next level that we have to get to?
Yeah.
What's the next, the next hill? Whereas Jesus, in this instance, didn't do that. He kind of called time out.
Yeah, sometimes we need to actually get off your adrenaline treadmill, don't we?
Yeah.
And actually have time to pause and reflect before we go out again. So let me read the story anyway, from starting in Mark chapter 6, verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then Jesus, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion of them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. And by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend so much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish amongst them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up the 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. And immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Sharon, do you want to just unpack for us a little bit about the rhythm that you see here in Jesus' life?
Well, I guess we see this rhythm of withdrawing and then coming back into connection and then withdrawing. So he had decided that the disciples needed time out. They had experienced the trauma of John the Baptist being murdered, and then they'd also been out on assignment, so they would have been exhausted. And so he's here trying to teach them this principle of solitude and slowing down and reflecting and regathering your energy. And I think too, he himself, like you said earlier, he was probably grappling with grief as well as the busy. And so he himself probably went, you know what, I need some time out. But what I find fascinating is, like, if we were to consider like this cup, we often think that we only love when the cup's full. So their cup would have been empty, their energy levels would have been down here. And in our culture, we would say, well, until my cup's full again, I can't pour out. But he stopped for the people. He still recognised that he needed to connect with the people. So he stopped for the people. He met their needs. He healed. He taught. He fed. He did all of that. And then what I find fascinating in that story is he kind of said to the disciples, right, you guys, you need to go back to your time of solitude now. You go off like we'd planned, and I'll finish cleaning up here. So as a leader, he finished cleaning up. He got his team back on track so they could have solitude. And then as soon as he'd finished connecting and finished with the people, he then went into solitude himself. So we see this amazing, this just amazing picture of somebody who understood that you get fueled or energised by time alone, but you also get fueled and energised by being with people. That loving is both having time to refuel. You know, you love yourself by doing that. You love those in your closest team when you slow them down. But you also can love humanity in a big scale by connecting with them. And it's not really where your tank is. It's just making that decision that you're going to connect.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons, just summarising this, is that Jesus knew that he had to hit the reset button. And he couldn't just be with people all the time. He had to hit the reset button and go off into solitude. But there were also times when he was in solitude when he had to hit the reset button and go back into being with people to establish the healthy rhythms. And I think for us, this time at the moment, it really is about hitting the reset button, because what we used to do and what we've normally done day in, day out, week in, week out, in a way it's been like being on a treadmill, because we have the same patterns happening all the time. And it's like God's just put his hand down and hit the reset button.
I think he's challenging us. What do you reckon? Do you think he's challenging us in this whole area to kind of go, well, what do you value? Do you value connection? Do you value...
Yeah, I think I often think about how things won't look the same even when it goes back to normal. I don't think it's going to look the same. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been created in this time, but there's also a big bunch of time for people to be thinking about what they really want, and that'll probably shape what happens in the future, for sure. Yeah.
What would you like to see change in people?
I think valuing those connections, as I think you were saying earlier, just now we know what we're missing. We want to make sure that we don't have to miss out on that. and I guess working on strengthening that stuff, but also like whatever creativity, whatever those ideas that are bubbling away now, I'd love to see them come out, especially the ones that are going to unlock, I guess, things for other people, like new ways of doing things. And some of these things that are being created now aren't just for this season. They are going to keep going and help people to connect more and more, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah. So one of the things I know you're trying to do in this season is to be creative for vulnerable people and creating lots of beautiful programs for vulnerable people. And I guess for me, that's a little bit like what Jesus did when he, even though his tank was low, he deliberately chose to love people. Even when the circumstances weren't right, he deliberately chose to stop and feed those 5,000 people. He healed them, he taught them. The love tank was low. And I know coming into coronavirus, there were so many people who would say, no, I can't do that, my energy level's too low. It wasn't really that, it was just that they were busy, preoccupied, and probably not always making people the priority, not always like being busy with things that maybe weren't as important as the people. Yeah. And I think this is what Jesus teaches over and over again. It's the people that matter, the solitude plus the connection.
Yeah. So Sharon, Mary was talking about the things that she's doing at the moment, but also the things for the future. Can you give us some idea of some steps that we can take for both the present and also for the future?
Well, I think that in the present, we just have to be aware that our energy levels are going to be down, and most of us are going to be doing pseudo-community or connection for a while. And if you're living alone, like if you're aged or vulnerable or you're a single person, it's going to be really tough because it's kind of like you're in a bad connection because you're not plugged in physically to anybody. I mean, I think if you'd been single this season would have been so much harder than it is.
Yeah. I say that all the time to Richard because we've only been together for five years next month. I say that all the time. Imagine if we were doing this on our own, and lots of people are.
Yeah.
And lots of people who are doing it on their own don't feel like they can... like they would compare their situation to someone who's doing it harder and then not feel they can reach out.
Yeah. So I think some people are just, like with a phone, sometimes you can't get a good connection, you can't get a good signal because you can't get it out. And I think some people are just in that situation. And so we have to be really intentional about phoning those people and contacting those people and looking after those kinds of people because they're alone and it's hard. And then for others of us that are in pseudo connections, we just have to be kind to ourselves and kind of go, yeah, well, I'm not going to get my needs met at the moment. If I'm feeling depleted, this is why. And then coming out of this, I think that we need to have some thoughts around, well, what am I going to do in terms of how I'm going to balance my solitude time and how I'm going to balance my connection time and how I'm going to do that coming out that's going to be different. Yes. But I'm hoping that it'll be more loving towards people.
Yeah. I guess for myself, who often mixes with business people as well, I often see business people who run 100 miles an hour during the week, and they run 100 miles an hour on the weekend as well, and there's just no balance there. And that often leads them to make bad decisions in the end because they're out of balance and they don't have that time for reflection. I think some years ago we talked about the fact that 87% of our thinking time, decision-making time, happens when we're not directly thinking about the problem. So this time of this downtime is really, really important if we want to be healthy and make healthy decisions. So Sharon, do you have any other comments about why rhythms like this need to be a healthy part of what we're doing?
I just think that they make us more loving, don't they?
Yeah.
I think we become more loving people.
Yeah. So just in wrapping up the conversation today, I just want to thank you two ladies for your wisdom and insight. It's been absolutely fantastic. And just looking for steps that we can take moving on from here. Mary, do you have a suggestion as to the first step that we can take?
Just keep turning up, keep gathering, keep coming here on a Sunday and
having a conversation.
Yeah, there's plenty of things that are out there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Sharon?
So we're going to have some questions at the end of this conversation that you can use in your home, with your family, small group, with friends. But there's also, there's some initial questions, and then there's a going deeper conversation you can have with yourself to help you, I suppose, prepare a plan for post-coronavirus. So that's a PDF that we're going to have on the web that you can download on the Taurus Community Church website that you can download, and that'll just help you maybe ask some questions about what you might want to change coming out of coronavirus.
Fantastic. And a third thing that you can do is join an online alpha group, which we're about to be offering. And that's going to be, details of that will be available on the homepage of our website, tauruscommunitychurch.com.au. So just in finishing, Sharon, perhaps I could ask you to pray.
Okay. Father, we just thank you for Mary. We thank you for the beautiful work she does with our vulnerable. And I just pray for our vulnerable. May they know how much they are loved. May they know how much they are cared. May we as a community be really pro-life, their life. Help us to just champion them and just be really sensitive to what their needs. We pray this too for anybody who's single or isolated in this situation. Father, give us kind hearts to want to ring and just check in and see how they're doing. And Father, help us to be really reflective in this season. Help us to kind of figure out what we want to change coming out of post-coronavirus so that we can love you and we can love one another so much better. And I just thank you that you love each one of us so much. In your precious name, amen.
Amen.
We're going to a beautiful song now, I think, as well.
Fantastic.
All right. See ya.
See ya.